Rolling. All right. What's up, everybody? Here we are again, another episode, Coffee with the Founder, and have another outstanding guest, a brother, a true brother, a friend, a colleague as well, John D. Palmer. John, we're doing these coffee talks as a way to introduce people in the WPC family and my network to the larger community of followers that we have, just to let people know who people are, what they do, because a lot of times people see you at the conference, keynoting, presenting, and they don't really get to know who you really are. So that's what this is an opportunity to do. So let's start by asking you, just introduce yourself, what it is you do, what it is you're doing as a way to get started.
Okay, well, thank you, Eddie. We've been around for a while as we were catching up, but yeah, I am a professor of educational studies at Colgate University, which is in upstate New York. It's one of those elite, privileged, economically privileged institutions in the Northeast, predominantly white, predominantly wealthy institution in that regards. I've been here since 2002. I came from the University of Iowa and been doing the work here, teaching in social and cultural foundations of education, but I've worn many hats at Colgate, but we can talk about those hats as we move along.
Yeah, can you just tell us about your research though? You know, every scholar usually has something that gets them started, the foundation of their work. What's that for you?
Yeah, for me, it was always critical race theory with the belief of identity, racial and ethnic identity development. I still remember at our time at Iowa, we read Tatum's Harvard Educational Review article on identity, and it's like my whole body opened up. It was like, oh, that's what theory is, and that's what this all means. And you know, I was just coming back from a 3-year tour in Korea, so to say, and trying to seek out who am I in this world, and the identity structures really spoke to me. I wrote a book on that. I also do comparative and international education research around issues of multicultural or what we call now culturally responsive or culturally relevant pedagogies. And so I published a book on that topic as well. But you know, at the conference, I've been looking at, you know, more along the lines of what the incomplete graduate of today looks like. You know, when we think about graduates coming out of places like Colgate, they're supposed to be the most highly educated. I always say they're the top 1% when they graduate when it comes to their education, but they don't know anything about critical race theory. They don't know anything about critical feminist theory. They don't know anything about white supremacy. They look at me and say, oh, we still got that? And they're walking across the stage in May. And I'm sitting there going, there's something wrong with that kind of picture if they're going to say they have an elite education. So that's a lot of the research and on the ground work that I do. But I'm also working now with local refugees. Upstate New York is one of those havens, so to say, that says to refugees, we're opening up our community, opening up our arms to you. We're part of the Rust Belt of New York, and we need them. We need them in many ways. So I've been working a lot with local refugees and doing research around that area.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a little bit about, one, how you define critical race theory, and then secondly, what you've learned from your work with refugees in reference to the research you're doing. But before that, I mean, when you say to me, I'm a professor doing work around critical race theory, so on and so forth, I don't really picture an API brother doing that. I mean, is this what you grew up hoping to do? I mean, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. That's a great question, and you're a big part of that story. You know, when I grew up in Iowa, I was one of the only, if not the only, Asian face in my school besides my family. You know, in high school, my nickname, as I always tell people, was the Donger from Long Duck Dong of 16 Candles, and I hated it. I always wanted to be the all-American kid. I loved sports. I loved being American. I spoke English perfectly, you know, and in those regards. And so No, I didn't really see myself becoming this kind of professor, but as an undergraduate, I won the award for minorities in teaching at the University of Northern Iowa, and I was one of the first Asian Americans, if not the first. We'd have to go back and look at the records to earn that award. So I was surrounded by Black and brown future teachers of America in this program, and the leader of the program she's still there, is a Black woman, and they taught me so much about racial politics in America. You know, growing up in Iowa, I was taught the white way, not the right way, the white way, and you know, really taught of colorblind politics, taught that racism is over, really taught by my parents with all their heart that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt me. And so when I got there, that's where all of this started coming to fruition. And my first teaching job was in a predominantly Black and brown school in the Quad Cities. And I really, really enjoyed that avenue. But when I get to Iowa, that's where I meet you. You give me the opportunity to begin telling my story of being a part of this. And I still remember when we would go to those AERA conferences, you know, I was on your coattails, always going around to all these places. And you know, brothers and sisters would be looking at me and going, "Who's this Asian guy in this room?" You know, and I had to, you know, again, I had to prove myself, and I should, you know, again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I did prove myself in those hallways, so to say. But to get to your question even deeper, sometimes I even question it at a place like Colgate. As I said, predominantly white, predominantly very wealthy. I always wonder, you know, if a Black scholar could have had the success that I had at Colgate. What I'm saying is, I think I'm somewhat successful at Colgate because I'm not Black. And I hope people can understand what I'm trying to say here, that I'm looking at this and I'm teaching a bunch of very white, very economically privileged kids about issues of white supremacy. And if it's a Black man or a Black woman telling this or feeding this pedagogical platform with this curriculum, I've often been curious, or in reflection, if they could have had the quote unquote success that I have had at Colgate. But at the same time, I've always said, and I get this from Geneva Gay, if Colgate didn't want me, then I don't want Colgate either. You know, it was kind of that back and forth, that I wasn't going to succumb to Colgate's pressure. I was going to be me in the classroom. And I, again, going there in 2002, I was one of the few, if not, one of the few faculty of color teaching on these issues. There were faculty of color, but they did not want to teach on these issues. But we had some white faculty teaching on these issues. And again, they felt as though I was encroaching upon their territory. This was my territory of race. How dare you come in? So again, I had to carve out some spaces there. But yeah, but again, coming back to you and allowing me, as we went through some of those schools in Iowa, and we did some of those workshops in those factories, getting a taste of it.
Yeah, I'm planning to go through my old pictures and materials, so I'm gonna be reaching out to you, so maybe we can have some conversations about what we remember from those days. But what I do remember is what Malcolm Gladwell talked about. If you're going to be really good at whatever you do, a professional level, you got to put in 10,000 hours. And as I look back on that time, that's what we were doing. We were grinding, putting that time in, and and been brothers ever since those days. And I'm really excited about what's ahead. Let me ask you about Asian Pacific Islander students today. As you remember your time and what you went through growing up and where you were at 19 or 18, coming first year, second year of college, as you face Asian Pacific Islander students there at Colgate or in other places when you're out and about, what's your sense? What's the state of the current Asian Pacific Islander student today in reference to awareness, knowledge about some of the issues that you talk about?
No, I think we're still stuck in many ways. I think, the internet has allowed us some larger connections. But, you know, I was just reflecting. I've been teaching the class entitled Race, White Supremacy, and Education at Colgate since 2002 when I arrived. You know, I very rarely have Asian Pacific Americans in the class, and many of them come to the class and just trying to connect to some of these issues. In more recent years, we're seeing more and more international students, and mostly from China and Korea, and they, you know, they even have more of a sense of this activism, this more sense of this angst to push back against issues of racism. But for most, you know, Asian Americans that I run into, again, I'm not talking about, and again, we're talking about at a place like Colgate, some of the very wealthy of the Asian Americans, and they've bought into that American dream. They've bought into the model minority. They enjoy being second class to white because it's better than being third class, and fourth class is better than being associated with the black and brown of America. So they bit into that kind of aspect. But again, to stretch it to the COVID-19, you know, there's been an uprising of anti-Asian sentiment because of the China virus, or that you know, it comes out of China, and we've seen some altercations on the street. But to me, you know, this raises some of the Asian American angst, and I keep saying, but where were you for Ferguson? You know, where were you when young black men were being gunned down by police officers? The Asian American community, and I don't want to say we weren't to be seen, but we were by far not there. And now we're asking, oh, well, here we are in our own angst. Why aren't people, you know, coming into this with more angst against our oppression? It's like, well, where were you? And I think that's they're kind of now beginning to realize that if they want to be in this racial game, so to say, that they have to step up when it's not their quote unquote their own communities, and that they have to begin to see, and you were asking me this question earlier, what is critical race theory? That racism exists and we are part of it, and I'm benefiting from it in so many different ways. Maybe I'm not benefiting from racism as the white person next to me, but I am benefiting. And I wanted my Asian American brothers and sisters to begin to realize that, to say and accept that I'm a part of the problem here. But they never wanted to. They never, and again, I'm not talking the entire population, but they never really wanted to. They saw themselves as you know, the second class whites, so to say.
Yeah. Now, I didn't miss that you said, I said API, and then you said APA. Is there something, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, because, you know, the work has changed, the vocabulary changes. So I didn't know if by saying API, I was missing something there, but are those terms used interchangeably?
And again, I think part of the PI was trying to move the Pacific Islanders out of that. Just think about the Asian diaspora. You know, Russians would be considered Asian Americans if we really want to put it into that kind of context. Middle Easterners, the Western Asians would be considered Asian American as well. They would fall into that Asian continent kind of expanse. And again, I think, you know, we can't be saying to a certain degree that Koreans are having the same experiences as Southeast Asians. We can't be saying that Indians, the South Asian Indian, is having the same experience as somebody from a Persian from Iran. You know, I think that's part of this huge diaspora. And we wanted to make it a pan-ethnic identity, but it's really, really difficult because the politics are there. And the API, in many ways, comes out of the US Census of the 1980s and the 1990s, trying to, and again, think about just that massive growth. In 1960, there are less than 1 million Asians in America, less than 1 million in 1960. I mean, come on. That rapid growth has led to also a rapid growth in the diversity of not only ethnic backgrounds and languages and cultural backgrounds, but economic backgrounds. So again, the Asians that were coming to America with a fistful of dollars and a backpack full of education were having a much different experience in America than those that were coming as refugees, as fleeing from war-torn countries, with no education, no money in their backpack, so to say. So I think that's part of what we're kind of getting at, and you can see that on the census now that there's more breakdowns within that Asian category.
Yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit more about refugees and what that means today? Because I mean, like you said, 1960, that can mean very different things, particularly for, depending on where you live, whether it's Minnesota, whether it's Florida, and now you're talking about the Northeast. What? Give us a sense of what you're doing, the work you're doing, and what refugee even means today.
Thank you. It's been work that I've been doing through the Korean Church of Syracuse. We as in the church has been working with local refugees for the past 11 years now. We just did our 10th anniversary, offering computer literacy classes to recent refugees. And we've seen, every semester we run a 10-week program. So every year we have 20 weeks of this instruction. We go and pick them up at their homes. And one of the things, again, what happens is Syracuse opens their arms to these people and say, come to Syracuse because we need you. And then they live in the most desperate places in Syracuse. The dying city, the foreclosured houses, the houses, again, we've started another nonprofit to begin working on building, fixing the houses that the landlords won't fix, right? There's holes in windows, there's screens missing, there's holes in doors. And we're seeing this amongst some of our students here. But for us, again, the refugees, as you're saying, they look really different. A lot of them are coming from Africa, a lot of from Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, of Somalia and Kenya, and that region. We see a lot of them coming from that area of Africa. We're seeing a lot of Middle Eastern, Muslim background. And so you've seen a city that is, historically white, upstate New York, white, conservative, opening their arms to this community. But again, after a short time, they are isolated, they're forgotten. We're learning more and more about how schools push them out of the school system. Most of them age out by the age of 21. And New York is one of those states that say that you can't go to a professional school if you don't have an high school diploma. So, this young woman wants to become a hairstylist and, painting, doing the makeup and the nails and all that. Well, she can't go to beauty school because she never got a high school diploma and her English isn't strong enough to pass the GED. So she's stuck, serving at the local hotel breakfast every morning. That's the jobs, and they're not getting full-time jobs. They're not getting benefits, and again, my family and I just worked with a family that moved here from another city, trying to get their children registered for school. I mean, to me, it's just, but Eddie, I want you to know there are so many good people in this world. I mean, again, you go into some of these schools and you're almost tense, you're ready to fight for these families because these families have said, I just can't get my kid registered. You go in and there they are. The people, the people behind that desk, those secretaries, have all the paperwork ready for me, a smile on their face saying, hey, I know he came in last week. I just didn't understand what he was saying. It's not that, I wasn't trying to help him. I was trying to help him, but we couldn't communicate. And so, there's some really, really fascinating people out there doing the work day in and day out, and they're not getting paid very much to do the work that they're doing. And I've been really impressed by Syracuse. Are there a bunch of jerks out there? Yeah. I've met them. You've met them. We've all met them, right? But I try to focus in on those good people, and I send those people flowers from time to time. I'll send them a box of chocolates just to say, hey, I remember you, and I remember that smile that you put on that young kid's face that got to go to school the next day.
Yeah, that's good to hear, man. I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that people have been defining essential in very different ways due to COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, it feels like it's taken this pandemic for people to even recognize the essential employees, to understand and to see their day-to-day grind and what they're going through to try to, feed their families, but also provide the valuable kinds of assistance that you mentioned. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing around you in reference to the pandemic, COVID-19, and how it's impacting that area? But before that, how are you and the family doing? I mean, you got the kids, the wife. I mean, y'all are confined to this space there for weeks now. How are y'all doing? How are you doing? But also with the work you're doing there with the church and the community members, how is the community doing in reference to COVID-19, the pandemic?
Well, for our family, family of 5, we have economic privilege, Eddie. Each one of my sons has their own computer that they can log in and do their online learning in the morning. And, they each have their own computer. They each have their own room, even though my son, he likes to study where his daddy's doing his work. So he sits in the background of where my office is, but if he needed to, he could go to his own room. So, we have a great deal of privilege when it comes to that. Today the sun is shining and I could look out my window and there's recess. There's my boys out for recess, and that's, for me, it's kind of cool, for that. But, I do worry about some of their development. They haven't seen a friend for a long time, haven't been able to hang out with any friends for a while. But for us as a family, we started family worship. So we worship every morning for an hour. My father now joins in on Zoom. My uncle joins us in family worship on Zoom. My mother came for a while and she backed out, and she comes back every now and then. But it's given us time to start the day off with a family worship along those lines. But for me, teaching online has been difficult. I had 3 classes, and one of the things that I knew was going to be an issue were the students that are financially struggling, so to say. Most of their, I talked to some of them saying their parents had already been laid off, don't have a job. How are we going to be, how can I think about your class when we're thinking about how are we going to get food on the table, professor? And so I've been trying to be a little bit more relaxed around these kind of things and a little bit understanding. But the other thing is some of my students didn't even have internet access at home. And Spectrum was like, you saw the commercials that some of these internet companies were providing free internet. Well, it was a 3-hour wait, he said, to get on the phone and wait. He was like, I can't be sitting on the phone. He was sitting outside a hotel, tapping into their free Wi-Fi. And I was like, oh man, that's crazy. What if it's raining? And all these, that was one of the issues. The other issue, some of my students are in a 1-bedroom or no bedroom apartments, right? And there's multiple children trying to study. Like I just got done saying, my kids each got their own room, each got their own computer. Who gets the computer at that moment? Who do they play rock, scissors, papers at that moment to see who gets to learn today and who doesn't get to learn today? And those are some of the issues that we're seeing, and I would like us to, pay more attention to that as we move forward, especially at places like Colgate. But then, we're also hearing about professors, the younger ones, the ones with children, that don't have the space, that maybe are single parents as well, trying to teach in this at this kind of level. But I hope we can try to find some solutions, because we studied this 20, 30 years ago now. We studied this issue of the summer is the worst time for students in these struggling schools, because nothing really happens. I mean, it's like their learning shuts down, and that's what I fear right now in some of these struggling schools. That one of my getting back to just locally, one of the people we work with is doesn't even have a computer. The school's struggling to get him a computer. 3 weeks later, he finally gets one, but in that 3-week time frame, he did nothing, and he's a high school junior. And so those are some of the issues that I began to see. Yeah, Zoom made a lot of money. There's a lot of tech companies that are going to make a lot of money here, but I'm thinking about those that are struggling.
Yeah. It feels like this pandemic has stopped, paused, or given us the opportunity to stop and pause. And whether it's to get to know your family. I've been home 40 something days. I haven't been home this consistently in a long time, and I think my wife is still enjoying that. I don't know. I mean, but seriously, what I think about is the fact that we've had the opportunity to stop as citizens of the world and do some reflection on where we are as a nation or where we are as a community. So if you had to assess where America, based on how things have kind of shaped out around the pandemic, I mean, what is the current state of America saying to you? How are we doing as we look at where we are today and what we'll be facing, but also our kids will be facing over, let's say, the next 25 years?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. For me, I'm kind of curious. I just got on Instagram during this pandemic because one of my students was doing her project on Instagram. But I'm kind of interested in what is happening, because I tried to turn myself off from all that news, because I was hearing like one politician was saying, well, the elderly want to die because they want the economy to keep moving forward. And I'm sitting there going, that can't be the way the majority of America is thinking, because I keep thinking about those doctors, those nurses, those, and not just the doctors and nurses at these hospitals. Who's taking out those dead bodies? Come on, Eddie, we know who's taking out those dead bodies. Who's taking out the trash and all that kind? Who's cleaning up the rooms after a body is being removed? And we know who those people are, and they keep going back and back to work. And I think that's what you were kind of alluding to earlier, of who are these essential workers. And those are our essential workers. Those are the ones that we really want to dive into. And they don't, again, I hope that we're praying for them, but they don't need our thoughts and prayers right now, right? They need recognition for what this kind of life it means in the world. And I've talked about it. People like to use the phrase a livable wage, right? No, I don't want people to have livable wages. I want them to have professional wages. Professional wages that means that they can have a savings account at the end of the day. A livable wage is you're getting by, you're getting down to day 30 and you're going, okay, do we eat or we pay the rent? Or do we eat? You understand what I'm saying, when the livable wage is that very thin line between having a place to live and being homeless the next day. So we got to begin thinking about taking care of that kind of workforce in America. And I would like to see that come out of this. And I think we will. And that's what I want to believe, not in the American spirit, but the humanity spirit that makes up the majority of America. Yeah, there's going to be some loud people out there, and some people sometimes think the loudest wins the argument, but I think it's the heart. When we begin looking at the heart of people in this pandemic, of those that are becoming more and more conscious and aware of what it takes to live in this complex society of 2020, right? I mean, and I hope we can learn from these lessons, but again, there's that, to steal your term, there's that pessimistic kind of attitude here, is that it's not just going to happen on its own, so to say. We have to have voices like yours pushing the envelope, and telling people or encouraging people to see these other things, because obviously, as I was saying, I could get wrapped up in all the negativity of all this. I could get wrapped up in every one of those tweets that are coming out of of the White House, right? But I try not to. I try to just kind of block all that out and focus in on what do I want Colgate students, the incomplete graduate, to become a complete graduate, to have. And it's this sense of humanity. It's this sense of connectedness. It's this sense of belief that, you know, the majority of America just want to have a life of a wife and kids, or a spouse, a partner and kids. You know, they just want to have this kind of belief in a better future for their families along those lines. And I know that sounds very patriarchal, and I apologize for that coming off in that way. But what I'm trying to get at is we have to begin thinking about that professional wage, that wage where it's not cutting a thin line. It's the access to health care. It's those tough decisions between food on the table and paying the rent don't need to be made at the end of each month.
So I've been wondering about, at the Privilege Institute, our motto is, if you have a lot, you should do a lot, right? And I think what you're saying is really powerful, trying to block out all the noise and just look at what I can do with my capacity of power, privilege, access. Am I doing what I can do based on that individually, as a family? I think that's something that we're trying to focus on, want to focus on. I'm wondering, though, if institutions like Colgate, that has the history it has, that has the revenue it has, are they looking at what they can do in the larger community based on the amount of resources that they have, and are they doing that?
Well, you're calling out my employer. It's difficult. It's more complex than that. But what I would say is, again, coming back to what kind of blocking out that noise. I don't want to say that I'm blocking out the noise, because that's how I inform my students to a certain degree, is that I understand the noise that is coming, because many of them are coming to my classroom with that noise intact, that they're ready to argue, they're ready to debate against me along those lines. And I think that's one of the things that we can begin pushing back on. But places like Colgate, you know, yeah, I mean, I wish our admissions policy would begin to change. I wish the ways in which we thought about individual students on our campus would begin to change. I wish that we would move beyond the issues of quote unquote diversity and really begin to look at issues of white supremacy and how it infects our entire campus. Certainly, I would love to see more and more of that, but then it becomes a whole different campus. And I think that's what the leadership is somewhat worried about. You know, what kind of campus do they want? And I think they're very, to be honest, I think they're very happy with the way the campus climate looks, that they're very happy that we have so many very, very wealthy families that want to come to our institution, that want to donate, want to give to our institution. And it has to look a certain way. And I think it's people like me who they give a little bit of freedom to, you know, to build programs for those students. And again, some of our very wealthiest students come to my class with you know, all intents and purposes to enact some of the change that you're talking about. You've seen them at the conference, right? We've been able to get them to come to the conference from time to time. And so we get to see those kind of things, but I don't want that to be, and it's easy, right, Eddie, you know this, that it becomes check marks for institutions. Oh, we sent kids to white privilege conference this year, check mark, you know, rather than really getting at some of the hearts of these. So that's a difficult question, really.
Yeah, it is. And I partly asked it because I want us to think about not only where we are, but also we saw, for example, Harvard, you know, apply for PPI and get this enormous amount of money. Right now, I don't know if they're going to return that, but it just reminded me, again, people with that kind of wealth and resources, whether it's individual or institutional, I'm okay if you get that check and then you do something really good with it, right? I think especially in time of crisis, I mean, I understand the flow and the operational framework to stay in business when you're a super elite place. I mean, it's like the Ritz-Carlton, they can't lower their price to Motel 6 if they're gonna maintain the kind of, I get it. I mean, I may not agree with all of it, blah, blah, blah. But I'm wondering, I mean, that's what I've been contemplating and thinking about those of us who do this work and how we challenge and how we model based on what we have, the privilege, the power, can we give back and what that looks like? And start to ask that question, not only of our institution, but even of ourselves, is something I'm trying to emerge from pandemic modeling better. And so I appreciate you tackling that because it's a hard one. Now, I do want to ask you, because you said you teach a course about white supremacy and have been since 2002. And you're teaching that, I'm assuming, at times to not the most receptive audience. And what I found is when you teach these kinds of topics, you talk about or you consult around, it can be taxing. And so I'm wondering, how do you take care of yourself when you're teaching about white supremacy in environments sometimes that is not always welcoming that kind of conversation?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, and it gets back to what I was saying earlier. That I attribute some of my success, a lot of my success, of not being Black on this campus and teaching this class. You know, there is resistance, and there has been resistance to this class all the way. But it is an elective. Students are not required to take this course. Even for the educational studies major, they are not required to take this course. And for many years in our department, you know, this kind of was the diversity checkmark box. But in recent years, I would say every professor in our department is teaching against something, you know, pushing back LGBTQ issues, to comparative international and refugee issues, to gender issues, to race issues, to disability and inclusion. We've really built a department filled with every professor teaching from that critical post-colonialist lens. And that now allows our students that are in the department to begin moving from class to class, and therefore my class is not this kind of oddity. Wow, what's this professor all angry about all the time? Why is he always yelling at us about white supremacy this and white supremacy that? They're getting it throughout the curriculum. So we were able to build a department. Now, you know, we would like to build a university. Getting back to the question before, is that I'm hoping that we begin to push more for diversity, not in the sense of solely race, but really diversity across these disciplines that can begin to bring in professors that will speak on issues of supremacy, hetero cisgender patriarchy, on issues of this cutthroat capitalism, that they will bring these courses to their philosophy, to their history, to their psychology, to their biology. That's the kind of campus that I would like to see, and then Colgate can call itself this, you know, elite institution of academic progressiveness. And so, you know, that's how I see this. Have I met resistance? Certainly. I almost died in many ways because I took on some level of change on this campus that I couldn't do on my own, and it really impacted me physically and mentally. And so I took a 1-year leave from Colgate for that. But, you know, again, I'm back, I'm on my feet. I'm gonna be leading what we call the Office of Undergraduate Studies Scholars Program. It's for many of our students that are coming from, you know, historically oppressive and marginalized backgrounds. working class backgrounds. And so I'm going to be working with these students for the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What's up, young fella? Listen, man, I just appreciate all the work you've been doing over the years, and all the, I can't even imagine all the young people you've impacted there. But I wanted to ask you about some of what I also know about your background around adoption and cross-racial, cross-cultural specifically. And I was wondering if you were able to advise parents, particularly white parents, that were taking on, whether it's a cross-cultural, cross-racial kid and bringing them into their home. What would be your advice to them before they made that decision?
Well, thank you. Eddie, you know, when we were together as doctoral students, many of our cohort thought I was going to write my dissertation on this topic. And you know, me at that time, I was still struggling. I was still struggling. Jenny, can you hear me?
Sure. We got you.
Yep,
Okay.
good.
We back? We back? All right. Thank you, Jenny. We back?
We're back.
Okay.
I love this. All right. No, I was just saying, you know, when we were working on our doctorate, most people thought I was going to write on this topic for my dissertation. And I was just saying that at that time, it was just too emotionally stressful. It was too emotional for me. And I never thought that at that point, I was like, I'm still a novice researcher. How can I go into a community and test my theories out when I myself was still learning about this kind of critical race theory researcher kind of identity. I wrote the book later on Korean adult adoptees, and to be honest, Eddie, I said that's enough. That was just too much here. There's some really great people doing the work out there, and I thought they could do it better than I could, and I wanted to step away from that. But, you know, to answer your question of parents thinking about transracial adoption and thinking about, you know, this kind of mentality, I think they've got to get rid of the white savior mentality or the savior mentality there, that these children will be eternally grateful for them. And I also want them to think more about the birth mothers in many ways. What sacrifices do these birth mothers have to give? We're finding out more and more, a lot of these birth mothers were duped into believing that they were going to get their children back someday. Some of the, you know, sometimes the children actually kidnapped out from under the birth mother without them knowing and being taken to these adoption agencies. So as these families begin to reconnect through, you know, DNA testing has been quite marvelous at this. We're seeing that. So that's the kind of what the first advice is thinking about that three-pronged idea: the adoptive family, the child, and the birth family as well. But then the other thing, and this gets to the work that you've been doing, is that they automatically are no longer a white family. You know, once you adopt a child of color, if you're a white family, you can't think of yourself, oh, we're just gonna do things as we would have done if this child was white. And I think that's a great disservice to a lot of these children that were growing up. Yeah, they got the multicultural day. They may have went to camp. They may have got their kimchi once a year. They might have been able to put on a hanbok for one day out of the entire year, but the rest of the year they were white, and they were only white. And so I think these families really need to begin to see themselves in that light. And there's, you know, again, just for me, coming back to the research, you know, I was writing the research before I even had a wife and kids at that time. And so again, I didn't feel that I had the full maturity to write on that topic.
Yeah, well, let me ask you how that message would be different if you were talking to students, young people, whether it's a high school or possibly, I'm sure you're encountering maybe even some undergrad students there that are grappling with some of the challenges you may have grappled with being in a historically white community, predominantly white community, family, school. I mean, everything's white, right? So what's your advice to that student, to the students you face who may even be coming to you similarly to the way you got to college?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. It gets back to the three E's that I've taught all my students: engage, empower, and enact. And most of us don't want to engage our identities around these realms. In the book, I talk about the hushedness of our identities. Anytime that I came to my parents and said, "Hey, I got called a chink today," and I would come home in tears, or they pulled at their eyes and just made me feel absolutely horrible. And the hush generation, my parents would say, "Shh, don't worry about that. Just everything will get better when you get older." And when I became 27 years old, I was like, "F this, man! It didn't get any better." My parents lied to me, so to say, and that's because my identities were so disengaged by this hush generation. You talk about the hush generation and how we tell people not to talk about race, how not to notice race, and now we're confronted with it and we don't know how to interact with one another. And I think it's the same way with these young men and women coming to campus, that they don't know how to have these conversations. And again, you're talking about elite students. They are not allowed to make one mistake, Eddie. If they make one mistake, their life is over. It's this kind of, I cannot show any flaws, no weaknesses. And part of the work of engagement is not only humility, but to make yourself vulnerable. Because by making yourself vulnerable, you grow from that. And that's the engagement aspect. Because what I mean by that, once you engage that identity, once you engage these issues, your identity becomes empowered. No longer can those, we begin to understand why those kids are pulling at their eyelids, what the word chink actually, where it comes from and how it's been used in these derogatory forms. We know more about what these issues mean in a larger scale and personally as well. And that leads to that empowered identity, which then leads to the enactment that I'm going to enact change. Now, this is the important issue that I often say, that, at the end of the day, if they want to just go back and want to be like white, you gave me that term, right? To be like Mike, right? ESPN now, but I want to be like white. If they want to go back and be like white, again, at the end of that process, all the power to them, is what I'm saying. But they got to take that journey. They got to take that journey for themselves. And if they say at the end of the day, "You know what, John, I still want to be like white. It's more comfortable over here. This whole Korean identity, it doesn't match up for me. This is what's good for me," then so be it. But don't let them hush that identity away from you. Don't let them steal that identity from you.
Mm. Man, I mean, we could go on another hour, half hour, just because we've got that kind of history. I think about how much our relationship, friendship has, I think, for both of us, just given us just expansion in our life. Yes. And I just wonder if there are going to be more kind of cross-racial kinds of relationships like ours that we essentially stumbled upon in some later aspects of our life, or at least past our teenage years and young adult years. But with your kids, your sons, do you see them forming more of the kind of relationships we have now that could maybe get them started earlier? Or is it still kind of a segregated kind of friendship circle that we're presenting to our kids?
Yeah, I think, again, I live in the horrible suburbs of America. I always call the suburbs the garage door communities. We pull in the driveway, we close the garage door, we wake up in the morning, open the garage door and drive away. There's really no interactions. We live in a very, I would say, I shouldn't say very, but we live in a racially and ethnically diverse neighborhood. You know, there's families from mostly Chinese families, but there's Korean families, there's Black Ethiopian families within our community. But very rarely is there any interaction amongst us. And again, now the COVID-19 is, we're walking down the street and we're, you know, staying as far away from one another. And I think that's not a good thing. You know, we have an Egyptian family right in our backyard. We say hi as we mow the lawn. That's it. You know, and I don't see it. You know, one of my greatest memories, again, is when we went into those schools, and that, you know, every kid that walked by, as I was Jet Li, and you were Chris Tucker or Mike. No, you were Jordan all the time. Never mind. You were Jordan all the time. But I was Jet Li, and I kept asking my sons, you know, as my son is now 14 years old, he's at that moment, and I keep asking him, you know, how does this predominantly white suburban school treat him? But, you know, there's a lot of Asian kids in that. You know, when we go to the school musical, you know, you look at all the kids standing on the risers, it's actually pretty Asian diverse, white and Asian diverse. So he's not the only Asian kid in the school. Now there's, you know, there's only a handful of Black kids on the stage, but, you know, so we live in that very much racial isolation. And again, getting back to some of the things that we learned, I don't want my kids, the only interactions to have with Black and brown folks to be through this refugee outreach mission thing that we do at church, because then they're going to think that all Black and brown people are poor and struggling and are refugees. So, you know, I've been blessed with the fact that, again, I use my students this way, that my sons have had wonderful interactions with young Black and brown students of mine that I've brought to my home, that I've taken over to Korea with me, that I take my sons down to meet them and see them performing, whether it be in sports and athletics or dance festivals, or even some of the chaplain's office stuff. So they get to see some of that interaction, but again, it's not happening in our neighborhood, and it's not happening in our schools.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, man. I got to let you go. I wanted to ask you what's on the agenda for the next 5-10 years. What you got cooking? What are you excited about? Where do you see yourself? What do you think about when I ask you what's next? What's coming up over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm taking on this new administrative role. I swore off administration, but this one came forward from our provost and dean of the faculty, the first Black female provost and dean of the faculty at Colgate. And I feel really good about what I'm going to try to do in these 3 years in that role of bringing in historically marginalized, historically oppressed, historically isolated and forgotten students that are really smart. I mean, really, really smart, but then they got to come to this institution where kids are flying in on their private jets, right? They're not coming in in their Beamers, they're coming in on jets. And that's how much money some of these kids got. And these students are up against that culture. And we're trying to, getting to Bettina Love's work, we don't want them to survive at Colgate. We want them to thrive. We want them to take full advantage of every single aspect that this university has to offer. And I don't want them thinking that they're any less than, that they're less deserving than, they're inadequate in any way, shape, or form. But that's the culture of higher education in some ways. And trying to change a program that looks remedial in every aspect of the way and really turn it into a thriving scholars program for these students. So that's what I'll be working on. But other than that, in the next 5 years, I'm going to have a young son going to college. So, that's that. I was just walking around today thinking, gosh, I got to start saving a little bit more money. If I'm sending him to Colgate, I'm going to have to make a little bit more money.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I'm looking forward to continuing to collaborate and partner as we look at the next 5 years, 10 years. Congratulations on the new role. I know it's going to be exciting, challenging, and all the things that allow you to thrive. So let me lastly ask you, during quarantine, is there anything you've been listening to, watching, binging on that you'd like to suggest to our listening audience that has either taught you something or made you laugh, or just, like I said, just gives you a chance to zoom away from everything?
Well, Eddie, I hate that you raised that, because it's April 28th and there's no baseball. There's no baseball. And the Dodgers were going to win it this year. We were going to do it this year. We had the team. And so, TV is like, no, I'm not watching any TV. I want my baseball back. No, my sons and I have been watching a movie every night, it seems like, and I just let them pick about just anything. I haven't binged on anything since probably The Wire. I really enjoyed watching the school programs and that, but I haven't binged for a while, so to say. Right now, just trying to finish out the semester on Zoom. Zoom, as we all have learned, is very tiring. You're always on stage now, and the closeness of it is quite fascinating. I haven't had my hair cut in 8 weeks now, as you can see. But gosh, I wish I could say that I've been binging on something, but no, I'm waiting for baseball. I keep thinking the Dodgers are going to get a chance, but then it's going to be an asterisk World Series win, because it's going to be a shortened season.
Well, we'll take The Wire, and maybe folks can, who haven't seen that or who've seen it and want to rewatch it, they can do that, because that's a show worth rewatching.
Yes.
It was pretty phenomenal. Listen, my brother, I genuinely mean my brother from another mother. It's always good to connect with you, man. I'm sending you some virtual love here, Wakanda style, and I appreciate you, and just know that since the beginning of WPC and my career as a consultant and a scholar, you've been there, man, and I do genuinely appreciate that. Love you, and give my best to the wife and family.
I will. Thank you, Eddie, and same to you and your kids. And thank you for making my career what it is today. I wouldn't be here without you. I know that. I really appreciate you. I always tell people when I give that presentation at White Privilege, it's you that gave me the floor, so to say. You gave me the space to have this voice and begin to hear it for myself and see myself as worthwhile in this fight. Because as you started off, what's an Asian guy doing in this world, so to say? And you gave me that, and you trusted me in that. So I always give you a shout out for that.
I appreciate you, bro. We're not done yet. Not done yet.
Not even close. I'll see you, if not in Mesa, I'll see you at one of those. Please invite me once you get going, those white, what are they called, the smaller ones?
The symposium.
Symposiums. I loved everyone. I went to Boston, and where else did I meet you? I can't.
We were. Jenny will have to.
Rochester.
Yeah, and maybe we'll bring one to Syracuse or right there to Colgate.
Oh, we would love to have that happen. We'd love to have that happen. All right,
brother. Much love.
Jenny, thank you.